At approximately 7:15 a.m. this morning, I thought something was fishy as I walked down the hall and noticed that my door was open. I walked into my classroom and immediately discovered that the small aquarium had been broken and my fish were gasping in the sink. Besides the broken aquarium were the shattered remains of the piggy bank that had been on the shelf above the aquarium. A can of blue paint was spilled on the floor. Footprints of a barefooted burglar led to an open window. Bits of a white powdery substance were found next to the broken empty piggy bank. The only other item found was a half-eaten large chunk of chocolate candy. When the police arrived, they immediately began to gather forensic evidence. I need your help. What evidence do you think should be gathered and looked into to help solve this case? So let's get a list going up here. Okay, Dennis, what's one thing you saw?
Well, to say this, I'm sure look at everything, because it's like one little small detail can make you.
Okay, so can you give me one specific thing, though, that you're noticing that probably could use some further looking into?
The bitten piece of chocolate, like there can be like a DNA that's not it.
Okay, so you're thinking on that piece of chocolate candy that was bitten into, maybe there's some DNA because of saliva left behind. Okay. What else do we see? Christian? The footprint at the scene of the crime. So maybe if we have some suspects, which the police have gathered 4 suspects, that we could possibly see if that footprint could match one of theirs. Karen?
Going to open the window or still a candle and then always touch it, so we can kind of
All right, so maybe we should be looking to see if there are fingerprints left behind on whether it was the window or something else. Okay?
check the doorknob on the classroom door.
For fingerprints, is that what you're looking for? All right, so I'll add that to the fingerprint list, so the doorknob possibly. Anina? Okay, so maybe on the aquarium there was fingerprints. Steph?
I think you should check the glass to see if what they used to break it. Maybe they can use something.
Oh, so you're saying maybe looking at the angle in which the glass is broken, maybe that might lead us to a clue of what exactly broke it, something along those lines. Okay. Neha? Yeah, so maybe trying to investigate further, what's this powdery substance that was left at the scene? Maybe that can help us figure some things out. Did you have another thing?
Yeah. On the glass, maybe they cut themselves when they shattered, so maybe blood.
Okay, so maybe there's a possibility of blood that was left behind in the glass.
Well, like, it's possible, like, if it was, like, like with the powder, if, like, they touched it, it looks like something their hands have touched it, then if they touched something else, they would probably get it to put themselves somewhere.
Okay, so definitely looking at fingerprints at lots of places to see in the crime. Go ahead.
Okay, so I watched a lot of crime shows. It's gonna be like a long information. Like somewhat of what suspects to see what tool they use to break the glass. Then they can see like what stores they sold that recently and look at who they sold it and look at their records.
Okay, well that's a possibility if we were able to figure out what they used, right? So you guys are coming up with a lot of good evidence, but the police have left you in charge of a few things. They have collected some from the scene of the crime, certain things you have come up with today. They did recover a piece of that chocolate candy. Unfortunately, there was not enough saliva on there for the DNA, but there were teeth marks on it. So we have taken impressions of the 4 suspects, and you're going to be able to compare that today. We also were able to recover some of the footprints at the scene of the crime, and there's a little mathematical formula the police have left behind that can help us approximate the height of a person based on that footprint, so that may help us. Also, there were some fingerprints on the aquarium, and there were also a couple on the piggy bank, so we're going to be looking at those today and seeing if we could possibly match it to any of the suspects that we have. And we also are going to be looking at that white powdery substance to see if that can lead us to any particular person and just try and figure out what is that unknown powder. Julia?
Wouldn't there be fingerprints on the chocolate too? You'd have to like bring it into the mouth.
There could be fingerprints in a lot of places, but these were the places that were actually recovered because they don't always necessarily show through, but that's what the police were able to come up with. So the police have left us in charge and have asked for us to investigate these 4 things in particular to see if we can crack this case. So you guys want to do that? Yeah. Okay, before we crack this case, or try to crack this case anyway, let's take a look at the suspects that the police have gathered. Here they are. We have Jake the Junk. Loves sports. He lost his front teeth. He has trouble eating chocolate because of that. And he rubs his hands with cornstarch often. There's Dan the Man. He's a security guard. He's got some beaver teeth there, baking soda in his jacket pockets, and he loves chocolate. Then there's the librarian, Nicole the Pole. She's a little on the superstitious side, so she throws salt over her shoulder, and she's got a couple chipped teeth. And then there's Mary the Berry, our class president, addicted to sweets, never leaves home without her sugar, and she loves chocolate so much that her teeth are starting to rot away, and she likes to walk around barefoot. So let's make a hypothesis before we start our investigation here on who we think possibly committed this crime. All right, so if we look back on our information that we compiled together, we have the unknown powder as being discovered as baking soda. Both groups agreed. Both groups also agreed that this person was about 5 foot 10 inches based on the footprint that we found at the scene of the crime. We also saw the teeth imprints on the chocolate candy with 2 teeth, which matched mostly to suspect 3, and the fingerprints matched mostly to suspect 3 as well. So let's, looking back at our suspects, decide who we think committed this crime. So, and it's not coming up on the screen for you guys. Ugh. All right, so we have our culprits as Jake the Jock, who's suspect 1. He's 6'2". He loves sports, lost his front teeth, trouble eating chocolate, rubs his hands with cornstarch. We've got Nicole the Pole, suspect 2, librarian, superstitious, throws salt on her shoulder, chipped teeth. She is 5'11". We've got suspect 3, Dan the Man, security guard, beaver teeth, baking soda in his jacket pockets, loves chocolate, and he is 5'8". And Mary the Berry, who is 4'11", class president, addicted to sweet, never leaves home without her sugar, teeth rotting away, and likes to walk around barefoot. So at this point, now that we've gathered all of our evidence together as a class, and we have looked at our suspects from the beginning to the end, how many think we can draw a conclusion at this point? Okay, many of you. What does it need to be? 3 things we've discussed in class to be a reachable conclusion. It has to be, Jonathan, one of them is? Reliable. Did we have reliable data? Thumbs up yes, thumbs down no. Very good. Yes, we did, right? Both groups kept coming to the same information. When we compiled it all, they all kept going to one direction. Not the band. All right, what about the next one? Reliable?
Verifiable.
Very good, Kayla. So verifiable. So can we verify? Can we support or falsify a hypothesis here? Think back to your hypotheses that you made in the beginning. Can they be supported with the information we have or falsified? Thumbs up yes, thumbs down no. Okay, so we have something verifiable here. And what's the last piece? Has to be what kind of investigation? Go ahead, Dennis. Controlled. Very good. So, did we have controlled little mini experiments going on here? Yes, good job. All right, so let's take a vote again. Who can conclude? How many think suspect 1, Jake the Jock, is the culprit? How many think suspect 2, Nicole the Pole? Suspect 3, Dan the Man?
Oh, wait, no, I think it's...
Suspect 4, Mary the Berry. All right, so we can conclusively say at this point that who did it?
Dan the Man.
Dan the Man. Now, here's the thing. Although the evidence that we have right now points to Dan the Man, could we come in here tomorrow and discover a new piece of evidence that might point to, let's say, Nicole the Pole?
Yeah.
And we would have to rework our whole investigation?
Yeah.
Okay. Think back to our paper towel investigation. Did we have reliable data as we went through each one of our trials? Our numbers went from 15 milliliters in Brawny, 44 milliliters economy. The very next class, 47 milliliters Brawny, 42 milliliters economy. Just looking at 2 trials already, do we have reliable information? No. Okay? So, could we come to a conclusion for this experiment? That Brawny or economy was the more absorbent paper towel? No. But, can we reach a conclusion with this experiment? We had reliable data, right? You guys were able to either falsify or support your hypothesis. And it was controlled, okay? So on that final part of our paper, let's fill in where it says, based on the class results, who is the culprit? We said Dan the Man. All right, so far we've decided that it relates to scientific activity as stating the problem, who broke into the science classroom. That's what we were investigating. The observations we collected was footprints, unknown powder, the teeth prints in the chocolate candy, and the fingerprints on the aquarium and piggy bank. what was our hypothesis? So what did you hypothesize before we did the investigation? So who wrote down Jake the Jock here? Yes, so there was one of you, good. Who wrote down Nicole the Pole? Should be a couple of you wrote that down. How many of you wrote down Dan the Man? I don't think it was that many of you that picked him beforehand, was it? Was it all 4 of you? You picked him beforehand? Okay. And then who wrote down Mary the Berry as their hypothesis? All right, very good. So this is going to vary depending on who you were and what you hypothesized. Raise your hand if your hypothesis was supported. If your hypothesis was supported at the end of this investigation. So for those of you that picked Dan the Man, should have your hands up, right? Because you got supported that Dan the Man committed the crime. Who got their hypothesis falsified? Very good. Everyone else. Is this a verifiable experiment then? How many think yes? Thumbs up. Yes, good. Because it can either support or falsify a hypothesis, which all of yours were one or the other. All right, how about the analysis? Who could tell us? Was there repetition of experiments within the class? How does this make the experiment more reliable? So what did you say, Julia?
I said that there was repetition in the experiment, and I said that the more times you do the experiment, the easier it is to find it.
Okay, so yes, that's not the only piece of it that is going to say whether or not we can reach a conclusion. But if we have reliable data, we're definitely going to be closer to reaching a conclusion. Right? So in this case, yes, it was reliable. You should have had down because 2 groups did each part of the investigation. And they all came with the same results. And even more so, when we continued to compile all the information, did all of our results keep pointing in the same direction? Yes, good. All right, and then what was the conclusion that we reached at this time, Anthony? Very good. Dan the Man was the culprit. Good. All right, great. So this is the last little investigation that we did as a class, just trying to understand the basics of the scientific method. It's not that we're going to forget about this information. We're going to use this now to help us with any other investigations that we do or any other knowledge that we're learning about science, understanding that there's a process to it. And that sometimes, in this case, when we have reliable, verifiable, controlled investigations, we can reach conclusions. In other cases, like our paper towel investigation, we did not have reliable information. It wasn't verifiable. We couldn't support or falsify a hypothesis. And we tried to make it controlled, but we found out as it went on that it wasn't the most controlled it could have been. So in that case, we did not reach a conclusion. But we also have to remember that as new evidence arises, even conclusions that are made, like Dan the Man did it, new pieces of evidence could come about and we could possibly change our mind or have to look into it further and see if new evidence supports a whole nother idea. All right? So keeping those things in mind for the future lessons that are coming up. The thing I passed out to you while you were working was your scientific method assessment. So this is your final assignment. So I'm going to go through this now so that you have an idea of what's expected. So first of all, you're going to see a date due at the top. I'm going to make this due for you on Wednesday, October 15th. So that's for day 1 students. Day 1 students is October 15th, which is a Wednesday. Which means for my day 2 students, it'll be due October 14th. All right, so just make sure you have that written under date due. If we have a little bit of time today, you're going to work on it, yes, starting today, so that way you can clear up any questions that you might have. Especially because in this class, there are some of you with slightly different assignments than others. So we're going to have some time to look at that and make sure we have any questions cleared up today. All right, there's a couple things that I'd like us to make adjustments on, but let's look at part one of the assignment, which is the same for everybody. Okay, so part one of the assignment, it says, the first paper attached is an assessment on how well you were able to recognize the different steps of the scientific method. Fill out the letter that best describes each step of the scientific method for the back of the paper we did as a class. So if you look at the back of this paper, we are going to do that right now as a class together. So you have this as a reference, and then the next piece of it will be the first part of your assessment. All right, so if we look here, it says, each numbered statement 1 through 5 and 8 through 12 is part of a story describing someone's use of the scientific method. For each story, match the statement to the step of the scientific method that is described. Then answer the questions about the variables involved in each experiment. So A is to pose a question, B, develop a hypothesis, C, design an experiment, D, interpret data, E, draw a conclusion. So let's look at these different steps here and see if we can identify which step it is. It says, Eric decided to test his ideas for himself. He filled 3 containers with water and added 10 grams of salt to one container, 20 grams of salt to another container. So what do we think here? What would be the step that we're talking about? Christian? Design an experiment. Very good. So C should be what we're writing down for that particular one. All right, so the next one on here says, realizing that the ocean is a few miles from his house and had no ice, Eric guessed that if he added salt to fresh water, then the water would take longer to freeze. What do you guys think that one would be? Julia? Which is? Good. So here he's deciding, before he's doing the investigation, what he thinks is going to be the outcome. All right. C on here, number 3, it says, Eric realized that salt water freezes more slowly than fresh water, which probably plays a role in the fact that the pond was starting to form some patches of ice, while the ocean nearby didn't have a single crystal forming. So the word realized is there, so if you're realizing something and making a statement, we're making, yes, Seth? Drawing a conclusion, so it would be E. Eric made a table and recorded his observations of the containers every 15 minutes. The more salt he added to the container, the longer it took to freeze. So, Kayla, what do we think for that?
D.
Which is? Good. So yes, this is when we're looking at our numbers and trying to make sense of them. And then Eric wanted to go ice skating, but despite a month of freezing weather, the pond near his house was still not frozen solid. He wondered if salt water or fresh water would freeze faster. So we're wondering something. We're doing what? Dennis? Posing a question. All right, very good. So last little part here that you need to do is look at the manipulated variable versus the responding. So what's the thing that he is changing? So you need to go back to the experiment at number 1, where he's filling the containers with water and added 10 grams of salt to one container, 20 grams of salt to another. What's the one thing that he's manipulating there? Juliana? What's manipulated? What changed? So you filled 3 containers with water, and he took one with 10 grams of salt, and another container had 20 grams of salt. So what's the one thing that's different there? The salt. Okay, so that's the manipulated. The responding variable would be the thing that's responding to whatever was changed. So what is it that he's looking at to see whether or not he's got a response to the addition of salt? Taylor?
How long it takes to freeze?
Exactly, the time it takes to freeze. So that's what he's looking at as a responding variable. Question?
We didn't have science on 15.
you're off on the 13th, so it skips that as if that day didn't exist. So I would have, yeah, I just went through this last period, but yeah, so you have me today on Wednesday, then you have me again on Friday the 10th. You would have had, yeah, so the next time you would see me is Tuesday. So my kids that I would have had the 13th, I will not see until the 15th. Does that make sense? So it's as if that day didn't exist in school time. Right? So the 14th is the next time you'll see me, which is the normal time you would have seen me. What did I say?
But they want to
Did I? I just went through this and I thought I wrote it down. Wednesday the 15th.